In today's episode,
commands, right? Like it's still like seared into my head, right? Like the simple command, like show MAC address table. It was
Cisco Tech goes above and beyond, and sometimes even to Malaysia.
It's just another building, right? You create a few clicks in Catalyst Center, provision.
Exactly.
Tristan, you're up to speed on SDA now. You're on it.
Yeah. So now you're ready to help out on escalations, right? Yeah.
SDA expert, yeah.
Welcome to Cisco Tech Stories. A podcast with real-life stories from real-life engineers. Your hosts are Nicholas and Tristan.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Cisco Tech Stories podcast, a podcast where we interview experts in Cisco CX and more, where we learn about new technologies, we hear fun stories about troubleshooting, as well as interesting tech cases. I'm your host, Nicholas, here with my co-host, Tristan Venegro. Hi, Tristan.
Hello, Nico. How are you? Can you believe this is already 1 year that we are doing this podcast? This is our 13th episode, one per month, so this is our first episode of the second season, right? And if there is second season, it means that we will open the door to many, many more. So good morning, Nico. And today we have with us Nathan. Hello, Nathan. Good morning. How are you?
Hey, Tristan. Hey, Nicholas. Good. Thanks for inviting me.
Can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Nathan. I am a technical leader in enterprise switching and SDA, or software-defined access. So that's like the fabric part of Cisco Catalyst Center or DNA Center. I've been at Cisco for around almost 8 years. So I started in TAC about 2016 after I graduated college, and then just kind of went through the ranks, and now I'm a technical leader and live and work out of RTP, North Carolina.
Nice. It's a nice area. I've been to that office. It's a really nice place. So you have one or possibly more crazy story for us today.
That's correct. Yeah, I was trying to think, so we can kind of dive into the first one. This one was still when I was an engineer. And so there was a critical escalation for an airport in Malaysia. And so just like any other airport that has like those automated ticker boards that kind of shows the airport status or their airline status, if it's delayed, on time, that sort of thing. All of it went down, and they actually had to revert to just like writing everything down on like those big like easel whiteboards.
So are you literally talking about the old school boards, that just like always turns and just flap, 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 flap?
Yeah, not even like that. Like, imagine if we were like playing charades on like a big like kind of piece of paper like that on an easel board. That's what they were into. And
not practical. It looks very bad for the people who fly, right? You're like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of what triggered that. And so the original intent was to have engineers and technical leaders from Bangalore to head over, and what they found out was in order for those guys to travel into Malaysia, they needed a visa, and the visa would take 2 weeks plus, so they ended up trying to find US citizens to head over. So it was quite the flight. If I remember, it was RTP to San Francisco to Tokyo, and then Tokyo into Malaysia.
So that took a few hours.
And then I was there for around...
And you land on an airport that doesn't have any signs.
Exactly. Yeah. So by the time I got there, right, like the signs were actually working, right? The ticker signs were working, but we still had to kind of bring up the rest of the environment. I think one of the things was the baggage claim wasn't working, right? Like the automated, baggage claim. So there was still some work to be done. So I was there for around 2 weeks. If I remember correctly, I can still visualize, walking from the airport down to the data center in the airport.
A small parenthesis, maybe. Can you talk about, it's really not common that tech engineers travel, right? Because we're meant to be a remote support, but it has happened sometimes. Yeah. I don't know if it's happening slightly more often in your technology, or if it was really, really exceptional that someone would have to fly.
let's say, I was going to say outside of that, I was on site for some other escalations, like in New York. We had, I think it was 0.72. They were deploying SDA. And then there was another escalation for PBH, and I think that's like the parent company for Tommy Hilfiger, and some of like those other kind of like clothing brands. So more often than not, like you said, right, it's usually like our AS or consulting engineers that go on site, but for whatever reason, when it's that type of escalation, they want to tag it, I guess, handle the business. Yeah.
And 2 weeks is long. Usually, I've been on site, but it was usually 2-3 days, like at the minimum possible to unblock the situation. 2 weeks is very long, so it was really a big problem.
Yeah. Yeah, they. I remember the core switches were 6500s, but running Cat OS, right? So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, right? That's like the old school. Like we still separated like the RP, like the routing processor and the switch processor. So they ran like two distinct flavors of iOS, right? So normal show commands I was used to just throw out the window. And
I started in Cisco a while ago, and Cat OS was already like an old operating system. There was already iOS on the switches, but it seems like it stayed on the ground. It stayed working for many customers, and for many years, customers kept having one or two or a few more switches on Cat OS, and like as long as it doesn't break, we don't touch it. So it was already quite an end of support when you.
Oh yes, yeah. Like I struggled to dig up like commands, right? Like it's still like seared into my head, right? Like a simple command like show MAC address table. It was show cam dynamic, right? That's how you check the MAC address table on a Mac OS switch.
Yeah. And you don't look very proficient, right? You're the professional. You arrive there and you have to look up commands. It doesn't look too good.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that it was quite the setup. Yeah. I wish I had picked. Actually, I probably do have pictures. I'll see if I can send them over. But yeah, the 2 weeks really consisted of just helping like bring up some of the devices and then effectively like being on call with like their network staff, right? Just in case like random things popped up, and just helped out map out like their topology and figure out if there were issues. So yeah, quite the experience. Got very used to airport food. Right. There was only so much to eat at the airport, but yeah, got very used to and accustomed to coffee in the morning, and then random, kind of like mall food in the afternoon. Yeah.
And in the end, what was the main issue that bring down the displays and the network in the first place?
If I remember correctly, it was the classic like network like L2 loop, and then there was a big kind of win for the sales team, right, where they were able to refresh all of that equipment and sell advanced services to kind of refresh that network. Because their core switch was pretty old, and their other access layer switches, if I remember correctly, were also quite dated as well. So
it sounds like a classic case of the infrastructure is not refreshed on time, and it's a design that kind of worked some years back, but in between, things changed and more things were deployed, and then you add a VLAN, you add this, you add that, and then you don't rethink the whole design, and people get upset. Oh, it used to work, but a lot of things were different in the past, right?
Yeah, that's the classic where, it's like, it used to work like a decade ago, but you've added, how many terminals, how many other devices, and now you're stressing like the device, and it's not under support. Like people that used to know these switches are off doing bigger and better things, right? So
What goes on for 2 entire weeks when you're there? Is it like, today you found an issue, you resolve it, and then there's another issue somewhere else, and they just take you everywhere throughout the network because there's more than one issue? Or
well, so it was a lot of like hurry up and wait, right? So sometimes it was really to the point where, like it could be like someone like an airline like ticketing agent, right? Like calls in and says like, like this computer's not working. and the airline agent has no idea what an IP address is, just like their computer doesn't work, right? So you got to pull teeth trying to talk to like the airline network staff to then, interact with the ticketing agent to try and figure out what the problem is, right? So it's definitely like the IT help desk, right? But kind of at a bigger scale, because I'm on like physically like on site, but actually can't walk over to the gate, and so I'm just kind of stuck in the data center playing telephone, right? So that's how most of it went. I do remember prior to me flying out to Malaysia, I had to renew my CCMP and actually failed the T-shoot. So back then it was still route, switch, and T-shoot, 3 exams. And during one of the off days, I actually like recertified my CCMP in Malaysia. Like went to a random like testing center, like got effectively like the equivalent of an Uber, and then recerted my CCMP during my time in Malaysia. Yeah.
So did you have weekends, or was it like 24/7? You have to work on stuff.
Yeah. We had shifts. Yeah, it was myself and another engineer out of Mexico that both went, and so we kind of like had to flip flop shifts, right? So one of us like handled the first 8, and the next was like the second or the second, third, and then someone covered the other part.
Yeah, that's comfortable because it brings a lot of memories on my side where there's indeed one or more major issues which causes the escalation. Customers very frustrated. When you arrive there, they're at the point where they gave up kind of troubleshooting themselves, and any small issue, like you said, reported by an end user or whatever, it's like, oh, go talk to Cisco. They're on site, and like it could be part of the main issue, maybe not. Like we don't care, just fix it. And when you're there, you just have to really look at everything and fix a bunch of things that were not part of the initial problem. But it's also the opportunity to, after that, actually hand over a report and, like, guys, there's also this that is going on in your network that was not causing the main issue, but, like you should look into it in the next month, etc. So often out of a big escalation and frustration, it's a new relationship, I think, that comes between Cisco and the customer, because it's like a whole, I don't know, cleaning or sanity check. And then we resume a better working relationship because, we put plans into action. You need to refresh this device. You need to set up a project to fix this problem there, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually funny, right? Like that was probably 2019, 2018. And just a couple months ago, like there was an escalation for Singapore National Health Services. So like just like the UK has like the NHS, right? So like a standardized healthcare system. One of like their sales engineers still recognizes me, right? So it's like, oh yeah, you were on site from Malaysia, right? Like I recognize your voice. It's like, yep, that was me like years ago. Yep. So it's funny, like all of those guys are still kind of around and remember some of the things that people do to help their customer. Yeah.
Do you have another similar story? Like, have you been on site more than that time? I think you said yes, right?
Yeah. I was going to say the other ones aren't as cool, right? The PVH in point 72, like New York City is fun. I like that. I don't know if I would live there, right? Myself. Right, just growing up like in Arizona and other places, it's not like the hustle and bustle, right? It's kind of like a suburb, right? But I would definitely vacation or visit again, but I don't know if I would live there. Yeah. No, I was thinking about the second one. Maybe like shifting over, right? Like the transition from like enterprise switching as a technical leader over to SDA. That's kind of, I think, maybe worth discussing or talking about, right? I think it's an up and coming technology still, right? In that sense, right? Like all of this fabric enabled solutions.
I think there's two sides to that question. I wanted to ask you that. The first one is, so you mentioned moving or migrating from switching to SDA, which I know others switching TLs did as well. So one of my questions was like, is that a natural move? Is switching becoming SDA, or are they one and only? And then maybe I'm from enterprise technology, so I know about SDA, but Tristan is from service provider, so he's probably wondering, what is even SDA to start with? So can you start with an introduction? Why SDA? You can still have a new network that is not SDA, or you can have a new network that is SDA, right? It's like an option. So can you maybe cover that first?
Yeah. I was gonna say so. So Tristan is from XR, right? So all the big heavy like XR9 like those devices. Cool. So okay, yeah. So for us that don't get to play with big ISPs, right? Enterprise networking, right? It's like ranging from hospitals, those enterprise grade customers, right? And I would say for the most part, the traditional like campus design has been like access layer switches, right? Layer 2 up to your distribution and then up to a core, right? And then sometimes people do like the collapse core where it's just access and then there's a 2-tier or like collapse core distro. And so SDA, right, kind of like at a high level, right? Like when I say fabric enabled, right, is part of it is leveraging automation to help kind of deploy your network in that sense, right? So the controller in our sense, or for us, is Catalyst Center or DNA Center. It's similar to what Nexus has, where they have ACI or application-centric infrastructure, right? Similar in that sense, where they have like overlay technology and leverage VXLAN for kind of like that encapsulation. So SDA, we use the exact same thing, right? Our control plane, our overlay, we still have right now. We have a control plane based on Lisp, right? So like that routing protocol that no one actually uses, but
which,
Cisco
by the
wanted
way,
to use it.
Brings me a question. What is Lisp? I mean, I thought it was a programming language, but
Also, yes.
No. It's yeah. I mean, yes, but no. Yeah, yeah. So for us, it's a location independent separator protocol, right? So it's basically trying to separate like the identity, so like where like my laptop is, for example, and then pull it away from, say, it's tied or hard pinned to like this default gateway, right? So the idea is I can get up, move around and roam, plug into a totally different, area, and I get to hold my IP address. I talk to my same gateway, and we leverage Anycast gateways, right? So all of our devices kind of mimic each other from that sense. We all share like the same default gateway IP address. And so it's seamless in that sense. And we use Lisp to kind of help update other network devices in the fabric of where I go, or where other users go.
And so, how does that work in the back end? Because my laptop doesn't talk any Lisp, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's not, right? So just like any other like network, right? All of the endpoints are going to be blind to this, right? So as we get, I guess if we peel the onion a little bit back further, right? Let's say I plug into a fabric edge. So you can think of the fabric edge as like physically is kind of like an access layer switch. And right now we use a lot of Catalyst 9300s as fabric edges. And so that fabric edge still operates as the default gateway, the DHCP relay agent, right? And then upstream, we may have like intermediate nodes, and you can think of that as distribution. And then we've got borders, right? Think of those as like cores. And then we've got fusion routers to help facilitate inter-VRF communication. So if my laptop plugs in, we actually use device tracking, right, to help kind of kickstart and detect the device, so my endpoint. And then device tracking hands off to Lisp, and Lisp will then update the control plane and say like, hey, this is where Nathan's MAC address is. This is the RLOC it's tied to. This is the IP address that's also going to advertise, where Nathan's located. And then as I move, right, that Lisp map cache is going to get updated, right, accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. And so that is specific to SDA deployment, right? Or can you have Lisp without SDA?
That's a funny question. I would say the official answer is no, right? You need Catalyst Center to kind of automate and deploy this, but there are like some customers that have kind of like this SDA fabric without the controller, right? And they've recently come out with like Ansible playbooks to deploy an SDA fabric without the controller as well. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of cumbersome, like complex, like configs. So without Catalyst Center, people tend to get confused. So that's why they probably steer you towards Catalyst Center to do it.
So is it safe to say that we're actually leveraging technologies that would be each of them is not that complex, but combining all of them would be complex. It would be a complex network if you had to do it manually. So we kind of a no-brainer say do it with Catalyst Center, right? And it's the all-in-one package we support.
Yeah.
But it's not that there's a unique magic from Catalyst Center. It's just good at automating it. But we're using existing iOS features from every device now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, right. Like you said, right, as I know, Nicholas, you support like wireless, right? So we have wireless built, or we have the ability to do like SDA kind of fabric wireless, right? Fabric enabled wireless. We have OTT right over the top, right? But yeah, you can kind of think of like the orchestration engine, right, as like Catalyst Center. And then it's really, we still have integration with Identity Services Engine, so ICE, right? So for that security piece. And then after that, it's just leveraging route switch, right? Like we have Catalyst 9Ks that will operate as all of these fabric devices. And then it's security, wireless, route switch, and yeah, Catalyst Center kind of baked to make this solution.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression is that we had customers who like to have large layer 2 networks. So there was only like one core switch with all the VLAN interfaces. But the layer 2 domain was just very big across the whole campus. Out of simplicity, probably, they just allow every VLAN on every trunk, and it's easier that way. And also customers, not necessarily the same, but it's like two habits that grew, I think, over the years as the networks grew, because it was pretty scalable in a small network. But as the network grows, it becomes a problem. Having an insane amount of access list as well. This subnet is for the servers, and then we don't have enough IP, so we add another subnet that's not contiguous to it, and the ACL has become a complete mess to manage. And SDA is kind of an opportunity to reset all of that and say, well, let's put an overlay on top of it. We just simplify the IP ranges, so you have, once you have the subnets are not necessarily related to the purpose. So you have security groups. You say this is a server. Everyone is treated by identity. And then you have IP pools because you want to group devices simply in a logical manner. And then what happens under it is like, Catalyst Center will take care of it. But you just re-simplify the overall thing. And then it's layer 3. Your gateway is virtually your direct switch, right? Your edge. So there's no more so large domain, etc. So we're just re-simplifying everything.
Yeah, I was going to say that's one of the big benefits, I would say, comparing like a fabric network like SDA to a legacy traditional route switch environment, right? Is for whatever reason, customers really like layer 2, and spanning tree does its job, but when it doesn't, like things just break. Like we get massive broadcast storms, loops, right? But within SDA, right, like for the most part, unless you do some fancy features, it's all layer 3 routed, right? All of your uplinks are routed interfaces /31s. And so there's no opportunity for, me to like connect or self-loop my switch or like a ports on my switch and impact the entire environment, right? My fault domain gets isolated and localized.
So it becomes very easy to add a building, and you're not going to have layer 2 loops. You're not going to have to rethink your subnets. Oh, it's just another building, right? You create a few clicks in Catalyst Center, provision, good to go.
Exactly. Yeah. So going back to like you mentioned, like these pools, right? So the entire idea, right, is let's say like we're in one VN or one VRF, and I've got a specific, VLAN or SVI. I can replicate that across 10 different fabric edges, right? And everybody is, quote, in the same VLAN, and I can roam back and forth to different buildings, and I get to keep my IP address. I don't change subnets. Right. If I do deploy microsegmentation, I get an SGT, and we can enforce, what I can or cannot talk to based on that.
Is it just to keep your IP address wherever you roam? Is this really just, between quotes, the only benefit of all this architecture? Because to me, I fail to understand all the benefits of just keeping your IP address. What would be the problem of just connecting again and getting another IP? Like, why is it such a big deal?
I'm not a PM or TME. That's a good question you have there. I would say, outside of that specific benefit, right? I think the other power just comes from like the orchestration, right? Is instead of trying to like build your underlay and then you manually configuring your overlay and then deploying like encapsulation, like VXLAN encapsulation, like there's just not a lot of customers that can do that off of the top of their head without making a mistake, right? So I think it's a big hedge on, moving customers away from managing, 100 devices, right? I can log into Catalyst Center, look at my inventory, do mass upgrades from that, right? So I think that's really kind of the big upsell there, right? It's not just like the nitty gritty, oh, I get to keep my IP if I roam and migrate.
That's something I wondered, because if you're plugging via wired, you don't really care, right? It's not like via wireless. You want to keep your WebEx and everything running when you move. And in wireless, we already had a mechanism to keep your IP wherever you move. So I wondered the same. To me, the answer is it's because in the past, you go to another building, and then for historical reason, the wireless clients in that other building had another subnet. And then the wired client devices were also on a random other subnet. So you end up having an IP, and you don't remember, is it the right IP? Which subnet is this? And just from a management standpoint, you have so many IP ranges for your clients, or like which one is which, right? And like I said, it became a pain for the access list, but also just for management. You see a device with an IP address, and you have to remember, is that our server range? Is that our clients? And now it becomes logical, right? It's one big pool for your clients, whether they're wired or wireless, doesn't matter. One pool for your servers if you want. I mean, it's up to you to determine it. It's your logical administrative reason to give an IP to a client, and it's going to stay there, right? No matter where they are. So I think it comes back to the management again, because I don't see a use case of moving around and needing to have the same IP. Like it's not a static IP, it's still BTP, right? So I was never convinced by that. But for me, it's still the management always. Something else as well, and it's not really marketed, but one of the technology in SDA is TrustSec, so SGT and all of that. That existed a long time before. I think we got trained on that in 2009 or something like this. And back then it was like, wow, that seems complex to put in place, right? And customers loved the concept, but they were like, migrating to it is a pain, like, I need to redo all my ACLs. And
yes.
And then if you don't have SDA, you have so many subnets and so many, it's like, how am I going to, I know of very little customers who migrated to it. And the ones who did, they just loved the concept so much. They're like, yeah, we'll do whatever it takes. But now it's, anyway, you're going to have to redeploy your network with SDA, right? Because, I mean, you're changing your IP ranges and everything. You have to have a downtime in the migration and just redesign your network per building. And it's like, it's the opportunity to, hey, this TrustSec technology we had, but, you never implemented. It's part of SDA now. All the good stuff that, you were hesitant, just, automate them in one go with Catalyst Center, and it becomes easy now because you're doing all the moves together.
Yeah, I was going to say the macro and micro segmentation. That's, I think, another big benefit, right? Is the buzzword right now outside of AI and automation, right? Is information security, right? It's like, should this person be able to talk to that person and access that server, right? So being able to just natively, without just like configuring 10,000 ACLs and pasting them across multiple switches, I can just assign an entire subnet and say like, yeah, cool, you get this SGT value or this security group tag, and then I can define a rule on ICE or Catalyst Center, right? And say like, all right, well, if you're, for example, like let's take the college, for example, right? Like if you're just a student, you better not be able to access, like critical like infrastructure like HVAC or like security, like cameras, right? But if you're an administrator, sure, right? You have to access all of this, right? So instead of deploying ACLs everywhere, I just get to assign an SDT, and it gets enforced closer to the destination, wherever that traffic goes. So as ideally as seamless as possible. Yeah.
Something funny, I've been in a few escalations with SDA. So customer decided to deploy SDA when there's a new building, etc. And then because there is whatever issue, and we're taking a bit of time to isolate it and fix it, sometimes management is frustrated and they're like, yeah, let's go back to the non-SDA, to the previous way of doing things. And then we're like, yeah, well, if you want, but it's going to be even more complicated, right? Like, think for a second, all the ACLs you now have to write by IPs and like, and a lot of customers are like, oh yeah, that's true, right? Like, okay, Let's just keep working on the SDA and just make it work, right? Because going non-SDA for a new deployment is such a massive pain, right? Once you've tasted the simplicity of designing for SDA, it's like, let's just not go back.
Yeah, that's the big one, right? Is, I get it, right? People get frustrated, right? No technology is like that perfect or that seamless. It's gonna break for whatever reason. But I think, whenever I hear that, right, it's just like, okay, well, if you think about it, right, you've onboarded, how many switches, how many buildings, and you're gonna have to unconfigure all of that, like. And Catalyst Center doesn't remove everything possible, right? Like we can remove it from the fabric. You still have to delete some stuff, and then you have to go reconfigure your entire network, right? And what are you going to do, right? You're probably not going to do what SDA did. You're probably going to go back to a traditional like access collapse core design, right? Which defeats the entire purpose of this.
Nice stuff.
Tristan, you're up to speed on SDA now. You're on it.
Yeah. So now you're ready to help out on escalations, right? Yeah.
SDA expert, yeah. I've literally no experience with SDA, Catalyst Center, and all that. I heard about them. I've seen some CCA question about them. But apart from that, I don't know anything else. So it's good to have this introduction, actually. So thanks for that.
Okay, cool.
I think we didn't answer one of the question, Nathan, about the switching tech leads moving to SDA.
Oh, yeah.
Is it correct to think that SDA has two parts? There's like the configuring and deploying it. So it's a lot of click on the web UI, right? You have to know how it works, etc. So, it can be quite complex to know it extensively. But when something is not working, you end up having to troubleshoot the actual switching technologies in the background, right? Is that why?
Correct. Yeah, I would say the other probably switching TL that you're referring to is Yarrow. Right?
We had him.
He was on this podcast, right? Yeah, I was gonna say it is I think there is a natural kind of progression, right? Especially in the sense that data center route switch, right? They support exclusively Nexus devices, and you'll see some bleed over, right, where they have engineers and TLs kind of naturally migrating over and starting to learn ACI. I think it's very similar in the enterprise space, where it's the switches that we leverage in our fabric and SCA, it's all Cat 9000, right? So like you said, right, is yes, the orchestration engine deploys the configuration, and the configuration is always solid in that sense, right? It's like it doesn't like accidentally misconfigure something. So we can trust the configuration, but switches and networks will be switches and networks and not do things correctly. And so when that happens, right, like a packet comes in and a packet doesn't leave, right, you've got to dive in and look at the switch from a programming perspective, right, similar to what I'm sure Tristan does for his ASR 9000 devices, right? We got to do the same thing, do packet captures, isolate, and figure that out. So I think that troubleshooting methodology and that deep expertise in the platform, it just is naturally going to come from if I'm an enterprise switching engineer or technical leader.
I have another question coming to my mind suddenly.
Okay.
Historically, so I'm thinking about the history of switches over time. Cisco switches always had a lot of features, a lot of possibilities. You always had customers that, we can find cheaper switches here and there. And they do switch traffic, right? You can just plug device and it does do a network. But you're missing that feature. You're missing that. You cannot do this. But on the other hand, there was also a lot of customers using the Cisco switches, but not leveraging many of the cool features on it. They just had basic config, it worked, and they were happy that way, and they just like Cisco because it's good quality. But we had to send consultants, say, hey, how about you do this? How about, this would be more reliable, enable this. How do you see like non-SDA now people moving from a switching feature standpoint? I've seen some customers with completely insane switch port configs. Like the config of a single switch port was more than one screen in iOS, and so many timers and tweaks that I'm like, is that even a good value? Like, I don't know. Hard to know what a switch port does when you see such a massive config, right? And then came Catalyst Center, where I think we're going back to something easy, where you just say,
I think there's always going to be that balance in the sense of like when we say like enterprise customers, right? It could be the hospital, it could be an airport, down to like just like a really small business, right? Like then they use like a stack of 9300s as their core switch, for example, right? And I think that's really where, I know the wireless environment, right, is starting to see some of this come into play is like the Meraki, right, integration, right, or just Meraki is coming in. And I think there's going to continue to be that balance in the sense of, right, we have customers that don't do SDA, but they use Catalyst 9300s as full-blown like MPLS, PE, or CE devices, right? And then other customers just have like, yeah, this is a switch port access VLAN 10, and maybe I'll do port security, but maybe not. And I'll just route to my ASR 1000, and then it connects to a firewall, and it's to the internet, right? So I would say if the customer wants to use that Cat 9K and it's in the way, right? Like it will always be feature rich. But if you take like what you have to do for, I don't know, one single switch that has 48 ports and multiply it by several hundred, it just gets overwhelming, right? And being able to tweak, very specific timers, like you said, right? If I'm doing AAA or .1x or MAB on a port, like it doesn't make sense for me to do that on a printer that doesn't talk .1x, right? So I think the nuance comes from, and customers don't really know that, right? And leveraging the simplicity of an orchestration engine like Catalyst Center helps. And I think that's the sell or the appeal for Meraki, right? Is there's a lot of customers that just don't really want to get into the nitty gritty. They just want a network that works. And if it's cloud enabled and it's a really nice kind of front end GUI, well, it looks good to me and we'll get to troubleshoot that way, right? So I think there will always be that balance of, customers wanting simplicity and I just want to do everything.
I think that's our future, right? That's our roadmap. It's like you need good hardware. Okay, have the 9300. If you don't, you don't have the NOC team to really configure and manage features like Meraki mode is going to be great for you. Simple, it just works fine and, you're good to go. If you're a powerhouse user and you want to enable all the nitty-gritty features, Catalyst mode is probably the best for you. And there's some in between. I know that Meraki dashboard tries to stay simple for simplicity, but because they have the capability, the hardware is there behind. I know some customers can open a Meraki ticket and have hidden features that are more similar to the Catalyst side enabled on a case-by-case basis, etc. So I think we offer options to customers, right? They can either go full management in the middle, Catalyst Center, or full Meraki if they don't want to take care of it at all.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting, right? As I think the future is going to be the GUI, that way, right? I think I'm staunchly still kind of like I have to troubleshoot from the CLI, right? But yeah, eventually it'll give way to the GUI as they continue to add features and develop that parity to non, GUI.
But I think there is not a single answer, right? Because from wireless, I hear that a lot about people saying, oh, wireless or 5G. I'm like, it's not the same thing, right? They each are good for 5G outdoor anytime and wireless indoor, like anytime, period. And then there's some overlap, of course. And same thing like here. Oh, people say, oh, now it's all cloud-based, right? Let's all go cloud. And some of our competitors, I think, like they all go cloud because it's the cool thing to do. But I think we're better at giving options. Like cloud is not better than on-prem. It's just different requirements, different ways of working. It depends your staffing. It depends, the features you need. There's not one size fit all. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. Even like with Catalyst Center, right. It's like you have to like go talk to the cloud. Well, we've got air gap customers, right? Just like, military or like defense contractors, like they will not allow that switch to talk to the cloud. Same thing with like smart licensing, right? Is like we have to cater to, that ability where customers want our products, but they just, for security constraints, can't let it talk directly to the internet, right? So like you said, it's going to continue to be that balance. And if Cisco as a whole gives that flexibility, yeah, then we've got an edge on our competitors.
Cool.
Thank you.
I think we did the whole tour of SDA. We talked about everything. So that was really nice.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
Well, that's it. Thanks a lot, Nathan. It was a pleasure to have you.
I appreciate you guys. Yeah. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to sit on the podcast and talk about my experience. Thanks.
Thank you. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cisco Tech Stories podcast. You can subscribe to us on Cisco Podcast Network and SoundCloud or in your favorite podcasting app. You can also find us on X at Cisco Tech Story without S. Thanks again for listening and speak to you next month.